Hey everyone, welcome to the Human Cloud Podcast, the spot where leaders come to drive the freelance economy forward. So today we have Bryan Hancock. Bryan is the partner at McKinsey, responsible for their talent management practice. He is literally the perfect person for us to talk to. He's also author of the new book, Power to the Middle, and is also a host of McKinsey Talks Talent podcast. So, that was a mouthful, right? A lot of credentials. But so we're going to really hit on how to mobilize the middle when it comes to freelance adoption. So the toughest part about our space, by far, absolutely by far, is that we are not a tech industry. And no matter how good your metrics are, maybe those metrics are speed, cost, and quality, no matter how much you excel, our industry is still burdened by just change management. And literally that from 0 to 1, very relationship driven, very manual, just raw change management of how do you mobilize leaders to take ownership of this, evangelize it, and drive it across the company. And one of the toughest parts that drives this is the fact that there's no chief freelance officer. There's no part of a leader's job description that says scale a freelance workforce or figure out how to use the freelance economy. Leaders that take a hold of this are really trailblazing their own path and having to justify things that are not industry best standards or not part of the job description. So with Bryan, we are literally going to hit on how do we enable managers and executives to take hold of change, with freelance being one of the tools to change. And so there's a couple key themes that I really want you to listen for. The first is that what he sees in his book is that the definition of a good manager is one that drives clarity, empowers and challenges, is able to connect across the company, and is able to look at each of their team members in terms of the whole person. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is I want you to understand what a good manager leads to, meaning what metrics does that good manager, what can they really do? Because you're going to take those metrics and you're going to say, this is what freelance can enable you. So the third thing I want you to look at is I want you to listen to why. Why should a leader care about our space? And the key message that I kind of took away from him, one of the hooks, is that business has changed. It's simple as that. And when you look at what's really changed and the impact of that, there's a massive talent shortage. It's never been harder to have operational efficiency, and companies are getting disrupted left and right. So a little tidbit as well is I'm going to ask Bryan what would he say if his kids wanted to freelance, as well as if his kids wanted to drive their organizational change by hiring freelancers. So it was a really cool, personal, authentic episode. So without further ado, sit back, enjoy, and most important, go drive some change. Real quick, before we get started, have you checked out Human Cloud's industry landscape? Now, I know we use this word freelance, right? What we're really talking about is a massive industry where the supply, the individuals, are self-employed. But there's actually over 800 global platforms, and there's been over 100 platforms added this year alone. Now, within platforms, every platform isn't the same. There's large horizontal platforms, there's niche vertical, and every day there's a new niche vertical platform. Whether it's a platform for gaming talent, whether it's a platform for shoe designers, whether it's a platform for oil and gas engineers in Malaysia, you name it, there is a platform for it. And there's more than platforms. There are these things called hybrid agencies. There is freelance as a service. There's business to freelancer tools like Collective and Wethos. There's freelance communities, there's onboarding tools, there's providers, there's freelance management systems. Everything is included in Human Cloud's industry landscape. So go hop over to humancloud.org and check out that landscape. All right, enjoy the episode. All right, Bryan, first off, thank you so much for hopping on. where are our listeners finding you from? Where are you sitting?
Right now, I'm in my office in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C.
I love it. And so we had a brief little chat about Atlanta, but Atlanta and the different kind of categories we'll talk about. But I think, let me just, listeners, I reached out to Bryan totally cold. And so I reached out going, oh, I hope he hops on, please hop on. And so grateful to have you, so honored to have you, Bryan. And, sort of context is, I'm intentionally not going to talk about this episode from a freelance perspective, but our background is freelance. And I think when looking at your book, which listeners, please have power to the middle, go to Amazon right now, buy it. You're doing better than we did, Bryan. I can confirm that. But so when we talk about this, I think we're really talking about the macro world of work, how it's changed, and how there's a need for new work structures. And from reading your book, what I take away is that the middle manager has the opportunity to really be the leader here and the change maker and the driver and maverick, whatever word we want to use. So I can't wait to dig in with you. I got 8 bullets, in terms of stuff we can talk about. So I'll kind of sprinkle them through. But I guess let's start, Bryan. Do you want to give a little overview on yourself and the book and everything you're working on?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been at McKinsey for over 20 years and do a lot of research on people and talent related topics. And most recently have been focused on middle managers with the book that came out. And the origin of the book came from the insight that as change is happening, we've known for a long time that managers have a critical role vis-a-vis their teams. We've known that people leave managers, not companies, lots of those pieces that relate to the personal leadership. We've also seen that organizations that over time have better managers, have better management practices, also have higher returns. And what we found in particular over the course of the pandemic was that those two forces were coming together in a way that really amped up even further the important role of the managers. Because in addition to the usual team leadership, providing clarity in what you're doing, connecting it to a broader purpose, you're also having to connect people to work in a different way. You were now you couldn't just swing by somebody's desk and say, hey, check in, how are you doing? It had to be deliberate, and you were navigating this different type of work environment, and you were navigating a different set of pressures that were happening to individuals. We know that over the course of the pandemic, there was a study that said that 40% of people had no one check in on them on how they were doing personally. Not a manager, not HR, no one. And they were 40% more likely to be showing signs of mental distress. So we know that managers are important, and the people side is taking even more time now, even more important. And even more important as we're working through the changes to work, which we'll talk more about. And so we thought in 2021, 2022, as we're seeing all of this data come together, that now is a good time to really turn a spotlight onto the middle managers. They've been important for a really long time. But now as work is changing, we found that they're even more important, and the people side of their mission particularly so. And so that's where we started with the book, and excited to explore it further with you.
So you ready for the first theme, Bryan? I am so. I think you're gonna, when I bring this up, I think you're gonna go, wow, all right, that wasn't on page 1 or the last page. So the first topic I want to bring up is this term that you used called make work. Okay, and this is why I want to bring it up. So I started freelancing, but it was consulting back in 2012. I then was the traditional Big Four, and my aha moment with work, one of the big ones, was that no matter how good I was or how hard I worked, I felt like the traditional structures in the Big Four did not optimize for my merit, but rather optimized for me sitting in a seat and just hoping that they wouldn't lay me off or they would promote me. And so when I read your book, one of the things that really, really resonated with me was that when we talk about freelance, usually the people that thrive in this ecosystem, they prioritize impact and they prioritize merit. And usually they actually end up working longer and later, but that's their driver. And so when I read this topic of make work, what I took away was, okay, middle management the forcing function or the incentive structure is to literally make work for yourself to justify that you need to unlock headcount and justify that you should get promoted. Now, I'm just going to hand it over to you. Did I read that correctly? And I would love to just hit on this concept of make work.
Yeah, I mean, so I think where the make work idea intersects with the research is this idea of the bureaucracy. And what I think a lot of people have the conception of middle managers as the perpetuators of the bureaucracy. If you think back to Office Space, the manager is the one making sure that you've got the new cover sheet for your TPS report, right? I mean, this is all of that kind of thing. Think, middle managers, they are the bureaucrats. But when you talk to managers, they say that the number one thing that they want to change about their organizations, over 40% of folks say that it's the bureaucracy. So we've got middle managers who are the victims of bureaucracy, not necessarily the perpetuators of it. They're the ones that don't yet have the full decision rights to make the decision of whether or not to approve somebody's travel. They have to approve the form and kick it up the chain. They can't just make decisions. They have to call a meeting around it. And so there's a fair amount of managers that are saying, hey, if you empowered me with what the mission is, gave me the team to do it, and trusted me to go after it, gosh, that would make my life a lot better. And so part of what we think about the make work is, how do you identify what is the make work in the organization? By the way, what is the make work for a manager may actually be critical work for somebody else. That may actually be critical work for the finance group, right? It's like, no, we need the control somewhere, and we're going to put them on the manager. There might be critical work for a legal function. So no, you have to do this, for an HR function to make sure you're doing reviews. So what feels like make work to you may be somebody else's important work. But at the end of the day, what managers, to your point, the really good managers, they want to be leading their teams. And they want to be leading their teams on something that matters, something that feels like matters. And they want to be spending most of their time doing that. So if their day is filled with things that don't feel like coaching their team and don't feel like moving the ball down the field on the mission, gosh, that feels like a not great day. And so that's where I think part of what we wanted to highlight in the book and our subsequent research is, hey, how do you reimagine the role of the manager so they're not just there to do what feels like the manager make work, even if it's important work somewhere else? How do you reorient it to make those roles truly exciting and at the middle of the action?
I love it. And you talk about, towards the middle end of the book, you talk about the return to office, and you give examples of gone wrong, right? Of return to the office. And you used such a good example where you said, hey, I think it was a team of story designers, where these story designers for a couple of years now had learned new patterns and had forced them to formalize prior like informal norms that then enabled them to be better. And so once these companies said, hey, return to the office, what they're really saying is we're discounting what you have done for us. And we are discounting the great work that you've done because we're going to say, come back to the office. And you bring up this point where you say, we need to, middle managers need to be measured by outcomes. And I think I might be paraphrasing here, but outcomes over the office. That was gold. Another thing that you talked about in page 69. So you listeners out there, get this damn book so you know what I'm talking about. But so you talked about, there's three things that we need to do for leaders: is give them a bigger sphere, give them more challenging assignments, and enable flexible working arrangements, which coming back to the topic of outcomes. And so before we dive in, and I think this is the right time to ask you, why did you write the book? Because I think that's the overwhelming question that I got a little over my skis, and I just wanted to ask about make work so badly. But let's head back to why. And listen, writing a book is hard, right? It is not a simple, okay, I was just writing in my free time. No, this is damn hard. So yeah, do you want to return to that of the why? And I'm going to use kind of the outcomes over the office to just say, I think it's a good time to now ask that question.
No, the reason we wrote the book is because we look down the road and we see the changes that are happening to work, whether it's the next wave of automation that is going to require organizations to rethink, what roles exist within the company, whether it is working in the hybrid environment. where we have to balance what some of the new norms are versus, what work needs to get done, whether it is, connecting more deeply with individuals. We know that, folks now want to be more explicit in talking through their entire life in the context of their work. And partially that's driven by, if you're working from home, for part of the time, and that's enabling you to take your dad to the eye doctor. It's enabling you to pick up the kids from school. It's enabling you to actually have the dog that you always wanted and couldn't have. Hey, now, and when you're coming back, it's like, ooh, I need to talk about the other parts of my life because now I've embedded that more in my work life. So if you think about those kinds of conversations, you think about the changes to work, the manager is at the center of making all of that work, both for the company and for the individual. And so as we're looking at these changes, we always knew managers were important for performance and for people. But when you're looking at how work is changing, and when you're looking at how the environment is changing, how the workplace is changing, and you're looking at how workers are changing and their expectations are changing, we just thought managers are such at the middle of that. And we didn't hear a lot of people talking about it. We didn't hear a lot of the conversation of how managers were going to be critical. So, one of the things we thought was great was after we had the book manuscript written and some of the early research, coming out ahead of the publication, there were several commenters at Davos in January 2023 that said 2023 is going to be the year of the manager, citing many of the same underlying factors. So we thought that was a great recognition of, and also good timing for the book, to have the recognition of, all of these factors coming to the manager, where the manager is, going to continue to be, more important than ever.
And so let's define when we say a good manager. And I do want to make sure, I'm going to make little jokes, right? So when I excelled in a corporate environment, it kind of didn't feel right that, okay, you get to now become a manager, because part of me was like, hey, I still want to keep my hands dirty. I still want to empower those around me. And so what's the difference between when I was leading a product versus now, being a manager? So I think let's hit on, how do you define a good manager? And then I think what would be interesting is, how do you define a good manager yesterday, today, and in the future?
I think a good manager needs to be able to do four things really well. The first is to provide clarity and meaning to work. Role clarity. What is it that you're supposed to be doing? And connection, meaning, and why? Why is it important to our team, to the company, to the world more broadly? Providing clarity in work and connecting it to meaning is one very important role for managers. The second is to be empowering and challenging. We found that empowering managers that don't micromanage, that creates, a lot of positive energy within teams. But that has to be balanced by challenging leadership. It has to, you have to hold people accountable to results, be able to have a difficult conversation when things aren't going. If everything is like, hey, go forward, do what you did your best. Okay. That's not going to advance as much as, hey, thank you so much for the effort. Here are the four specific things that we need to talk about in terms of what we need to do to drive performance. So that empowering and challenging leadership together. The third thing managers need to do is to make connections within and across teams. This is something that has become even more important, as we've transitioned, to the current hybrid working environment that many of us work in post-pandemic. Because connections within the teams actually went up. When you had your personal Zoom screen or Team screen, that was like your own personal Hollywood Squares, that's who you saw every day, right? And connectivity within your team actually went up. Now, you could debate whether the quality of the connections were there by the time you're doing your sixth Zoom happy hour, but you did have, the work connectivity with the immediate colleagues. But connectivity across teams went down. And so one important role of the manager in the current environment is to figure out, hey, when do we as a team need to come together? Our own team. What are we going to do when we're together? And so if we're in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, how are we taking advantage to us being together other than me sitting in my desk here doing the same stuff I could have been doing at home? And a manager is responsible for making that happen. Manager is also responsible for making connections across teams, because it may be that not all the teams are co-located. It may be that the teams are coming in on different days. Like, how does that work? And the final thing managers need to do in the current environment is, manage the whole person and be concerned for the whole person, be interested in the whole person. Hey, what are your career aspirations? Where do you want to go? What are you trying to balance between work and home and the rest of life? Hey, of the different things that you've got going on, I know you've got, your dad that you're taking care of. I know that you got kids, they got this. What do we need to work around this week? And how do we balance those with kind of what we need to be doing on the work, and having those conversations? And many managers are naturally skilled at those conversations. They're empathetic human beings. They're able to show up and have, show concern for the other folks. But it's also empathy with a little bit of an edge. It's not just like, hey, I get where you are, but it's also, okay, and how are we balancing that mission that we also talked about? And how do we do that? So if you think about where good managers have always been, role clarity and connecting to the mission has always been important. Arguably, connecting to the mission is even more important now. Connecting to broader purpose is important now more than ever. Over the course of the pandemic, over half of the respondents we surveyed said that they used the time to re-examine what they were doing in life, or role purpose, and a fair amount of those shifted. So purpose is even more important, but it's always been important to connect, to have the role clarity and connection purpose. Being a good manager, not micromanaging, but at the same time challenging, that's always been important. Arguably, the connectivity within and across teams, there's a premium on that now because of the way work has shifted, means that that's more of a challenge now. And then, this managing or being interested in the whole person, again, being an empathetic manager has always mattered. But in the current environment where we're hearing more on mental health, where we're balancing work and home in a more holistic way, means we need to have those conversations more and equip our managers to do it. So arguably that's become a little bit more important as well.
I love that you lay out the four. And so, we're gonna sort of bridge into what work models are the models that leaders should grab onto to be able to drive this change. So that's what we're going to sort of dovetail into. And I think one of the questions as we get here, and let me just read back to what you said. So the definition of a good manager, they need to drive clarity. They need to be empowering and challenging. So empathy with an edge. They need to drive connections within and across the teams and org. And they need to be able to coach the whole person. So those four things, if you, for you listeners right now, write those down on a sticky note, put it on your monitor, right? And just ensure you have that so that when things are tough, you look and you go, okay, am I doing one of these four, right? So that's awesome. Now, the next question is I want to dovetail into the metrics / the measurement of this. And what's going to be tough is we're going to have to thread the needle here between balancing sort of the micro and the macro. So the 40,000 foot view and then on the ground. And the reason I ask this is because one of the toughest parts of our space, meaning freelance and leaders that are strategically scaling freelance across their org, is that there is not one common standard metric that leaders can point to say, look at the leader before me. This is what they did. This was the impact on the business. And so in some cases, you hear how freelance can impact the P&L. In some cases, you hear how freelance can be a cost efficiency metric. In some cases, it's purely related to the product in terms of increasing CSAT or something of that manner. And I wonder, in general, how can leaders measure / pick the metrics that really drive proof that they're driving value? And so it might be as simple as, hey, always tie to P&L. Hey, always tied to what your boss did prior, right? But I just wonder from your perspective, right? How do you define the metrics? And also, you're coming from the world's best at this, right? So McKinsey, and so you were Delta prior. So you're not coming saying, oh, I think this. No. You've had 20 plus years of being trained in how to be the best, right? From a measurement perspective. So let me just open it up to you. How do we measure good leadership and good management?
So I think we can do it in a few different ways. So I think one thing that we can do is, before we even promote somebody into management, define what we think the markers of a good manager would be. Understand, like, okay, here are the knowledge, skills, attributes, experiences of a manager in our organization. And here's how we're going to assess for it. Because we know that in many organizations, in particular many technical organizations, the person that gets promoted is the great individual contributor that then gets promoted into management. And so one of the first things we can do is say, hey, how do we assess folks so that we can make sure that we've got people in managerial roles that we think could be successful as managers? And on the flip side, how do we create great career paths for those individual contributors that may not be good natural managers, may not want to manage, but may want to develop, and advance in their career as individual contributors? So there's part of this is defining up front, and what are the characteristics we think of a good manager, and how do we assess against it? And then how do we continue to assess against it? How do we create the right scorecards, that provide insight into the people leadership side of management? And some of that can be, hey, did I complete, check-ins on the right amount? Even some of it can be a completion. Have I done this? Some of it can be how I built my team. It's often context specific. In a McKinsey environment, I get a people leadership scorecard, and part of my scorecard includes the diversity of the team members that I have, and diversity broadly speaking, tenures and offices and practices, and am I pulling in capabilities? Kind of a broad base, am I bringing the best to the firm? And that's part of the people leadership. Where do I stand on people that respond that I am one of their mentors? I'm a sponsor, that there's somebody that they look for advice. Those things make sense in the McKinsey context, but there are other parallels that we've seen to create people scorecards for managers. But then there's also the piece that managers have to deliver. And so how do we get to understanding, the performance side of managers? And I think what we see organizations try to do is define for any managerial role, what are the core jobs to be done? And how do you measure whether you've done that well? And for some managers, it may be, hey, I'm growing market share of my team. That's one of the jobs to be done. So we can have the output metric for it. Others may be, increasing productivity on the factory line. Okay, great. Let's define that. But it gets to a really clear view of the jobs to be done. So you take a step back. How do you measure what a good manager is? Well, first, you start off by defining what you think the people side of management is, assess for it, and then score it. And then on the other side, you look and say, hey, well, what is it that we are managing? Well, what are the core jobs to be done? How do I define success? And how do I measure that?
I love that. So start with the contextual job to be done, which I wonder, do you see, Bryan, any consistent hooks that every leader, executive kind of is drawn to right now? Like if we were to say, we had a CHRO that was prior Nickelodeon before on the pod a couple of weeks ago. His was talent shortage. When we, one of our clients, was a massive IT outsourcing. Meeting revenue was one of the hooks. Do you see any consistent patterns that every business leader is worried about right now? And I know that's a very big question, but what are you seeing?
In some industries, it's absolutely talent shortage. It is a question of, if you are talking about nurses, or if you're talking about, folks in, certain segments of manufacturing, as we're looking at semiconductors and electric vehicles and other forms of advanced manufacturing. I mean, there are pockets of our economy that are growing, where demand is growing, and we don't have the people growing alongside it. For those folks, talent is a front and center concern. For some other organizations, it can be around operational efficiency in a changing environment. How do we introduce the competitive edge? What's happening? For some, it's technology disruption, and disruption where value is coming from. I mean, one of the things I always like to, if somebody calls me about talent strategy, my big question is, well, what's changed? If you've been a successful business, Fortune 500 business for the past X number of years, you have figured out how to get people aligned against your value agenda. So what's changed? Has the way we're delivering value changed? Is it a Gen AI disruption? Is it disruption from new forms of competitors? Or is it a labor market disruption? Hey, I can't find enough people that have X skill or Y skill. And getting to that, core of, well, what's changed? And therefore, what do we need to do? So that's typically, where I think we find the most interesting talent-related conversations is really getting under, what's changed?
I love that. And and I mean, it's funny. It was when I was like a beady-eyed out of business school, I always would look at like Clayton Christensen, right? And then look at Moore's Law and Metcalfe's Law and go, things are changing by the second, right? And then you would talk to a CEO and they'd go, yeah, they are. But look at the rest of my priorities, right? And so I think part of what the things in your book that you really brought out was very clear examples of exactly what's changed. And I'm going to call one out. And I think it's going to now dovetail and bridge into when we look at sort of how is talent shifting. And the example you brought up was, I think it was a tech company, but it was a like budding woman that was about to join the company. And when there was two companies that she was looking at, and one company said, hey, do you want to work part-time? Do you want to work flexibly? And here's our vision. And the other said, look at this massive salary package and look at this awesome office that you're going to work in, right? And, plot twist, big surprise that she chose the part-time flexible option. Now, that's our world, right? And so from what we've seen is that 33% of the US is freelancing right now. It's kind of crazy numbers that over half the workforce is slotted to be freelancing. I think the numbers are all fuzzy, but directionally it's all kind of saying the same thing, that individuals are okay with working in a fractional, part-time, contractual basis rather than full-time. Now, it's obviously contextual, right? Take a fresh grad. I still tell them to get a job versus someone who's been 5 years at a HubSpot or Microsoft. They're in a much better position. But so I wonder, what is your overall take when we look at, and we can either define the space, we can just call it freelance and then just talk about it. But what is your view of this growing liquid freelance? Oh, obviously, Bryan, I just called it liquid, which Accenture called it that. So I apologize for that. But what is your view on the talent space in general? And then maybe you just say freelance is a cute little trendy thing, but how does freelance fit into this?
No, I mean, we've done similar research. In 2016, we found 27% of the U.S. were, respondents were freelance workers in some capacity, and it was 36% in our last survey in 2022. So very close to your 1/3 number. And what we found is that those folks actually tended to be more optimistic than the average employee. So they were optimistic about the economy, optimistic about where they were headed. And the percentage of folks that were doing it for extra income on the side. So the freelance baker that is making a wedding cake as a side business, right? That was, a significant part, earning some extra discretionary income. The folks doing it for discretionary income dropped by half. And so what we're finding is people finding it's a viable career and wanting to have the flexibility to work maybe in a different way. We have a talent trend survey that we've done over the past several years. And within that, we're asking people their workplace preferences, what they, how likely they are to leave their current job, what they're looking for in the new job. And we found that there are a subset of workers that do prioritize flexibility above and beyond anything else. And that can be for a variety of reasons, be it that they really like to ski and they want something that they can be free to ski during the ski season and make their income at other times, or other forms of flexibility. Hey, I've got to balance childcare at the home or other pieces. I mean, flexibility is a pretty broad. I think what we've seen, flexibility is a pretty broad concept. It's not just, can I work from home or can I be part-time? It's, hey, do I have flexibility in how I get my work done and when I get it done and the duration of time? Like, can I get certain seasons off? Can I step away when I need to step away or would like to step away? But a broader form of flexibility. And for that segment of the workforce that really wants flexibility, I think they've been able to find it, in particular, if they have skills that are in high demand. I think they've been able to find ways of connecting in the way that they'd like to connect to work.
So I'm going to ask you a funny question, okay? And I'm going to give you a little bit of context. So when this situation happened in my world, the answer was he's gone off the deep end. He's throwing his opportunities away, and he's an idiot. Was the basic theme. This was around 2015, 2016. And what I did was I dropped out of my current MBA at the time to go full time in freelancing and building a business. And I always had this pattern of I freelance to make the money and then build the business, lose all the money, freelance again, right? And so I had an opportunity at a big four and I had the shiny diploma and all that stuff. But I said, nope, I'm going to dive headfirst into the freelance economy. And I moved to San Francisco to live on a couch, to jump on a startup in the space, So at the time, it was really dumb. Now, I'm going to ask you a funny question because you have two very, very intelligent, ambitious kids, one in college, and you mentioned one about to be in college. What would you do if they said, hey, Dad, I'm actually not going to go work at McKinsey. I'm going to take on either a freelance role at McKinsey or I'm going to freelance at McKinsey and Bain or different things. What would you do if they said, I'm going to prioritize freelancing?
I would ask them what they want to get out of the freelance experience. And I would say, how are you thinking about skill development? How are you thinking about broadening your network? We know from the Burning Glass Institute has done some great research that shows that your first employer matters a lot in terms of skill development and what the next opportunities come from there. And so if they were talking about freelancing, I would want to say, okay, how are you building those connections? How are you gaining the skills that you want to gain? How are you accelerating in towards the goal you want to do by freelancing instead of being a traditional employer? It's not that one is necessarily better than the other, but I think being a freelancer will require a degree of thoughtfulness and, okay, how am I constructing all of those elements together on my own? And as a freelancer, what's your support system? Who is it that is responsible for coaching you and giving you feedback? How are you getting the signals? Where are you getting your skill development from? How do you get and build your network? And it may be, my younger son's going to the Kelley School of Business at Indiana. From everything I know about the Kelley School of Business, it has a phenomenal network. It has great learning opportunity. You could rely on that to say, hey, I'm going to use this as a launching pad, but be very deliberate about the Kelley experience and network being what provides the infrastructure for me to freelance. And so I'd encourage them to think about those supports that they would have, how to make sure that it's a great experience and one that propels them forward. But there's nothing in and of itself where freelancing, I say, oh, that's a terrible idea compared to a company. It just requires a little bit more solving of your career.
I love it. Okay. So intentionality is the key theme. Now, and first, tell your son this, by the way. So one of the little hacks that I learned. So long story short, I did a public school for 4 years, and I went to Babson College for grad school for 1 year. And basically, I treated 1 year like I should have treated those 4. Right? I got absolutely everything out of it. And one thing I did was I went to every networking event that had free pizza, and then went to the alumni and took on freelance projects with them, which was the best. So tell your son that, right? If there's free pizza, go to the event and then tell the alumni that I would love to work on a contractual basis with you. And you can do that whenever you want, right? You don't need to wait for a summer internship. But so now I'm going to assume, let's fast forward 10 years with your kids. And let's assume that they are now, 5 to 10 years in, they're starting to really hit their stride and they want to build something big within whatever company they're working at. Could be Bain, could be McKinsey, could be Microsoft, you name it. And I'm going to give you a little context on now, okay, fast forward to my own journey. So Microsoft says, do you want to work here? I say, hell no, because I was working in San Francisco at the time and Google was cool and Microsoft wasn't at the time, right?
Yep.
Microsoft says, what can we do to get you here? And my answer was, I want to work on cool stuff and I want a path to impact. So they say, okay, do you want headcount? I said, nope, absolutely not. I just want budget. And so I had a budget to go hire as many freelancers as I wanted. And we got a product from ideation to scale in under a year because we had probably, I think, 30 plus freelancers working on different things. So now I'm going to fast forward. Your kid says, Dad, I have the option to either get promoted or I have the option of having this big budget. And what should I do with it? Should I go hire freelancers? Should I go hire a team of 50 FTEs? What would you say from a leadership perspective? How would you coach your kids on hiring freelancers?
I mean, I would ask them where they're planning on getting the freelancers from, how they're planning on building the, how are they planning on making that successful? Because there could be a world where, and make it actually a competitive advantage for them. It could be that the freelancers actually know more or know as much, but in a scarce talent market, you could actually get people because of the flexibility that you're offering in a different way. So that there is the potential to kind of make it a strategic play, actually, to say, hey, I'm going to hire freelancers because that's where it is in the market. And I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for these kinds of skills. And here's how I'm going to validate that we've got it. And so as you're assembling a team, you've got a sense of here's why freelancers matter and here are the skills and here's how I'm going to test for it. And if things work, great. If things don't work, it's also a benefit of the freelancer. You can say, well, that didn't work. Let's move, which is a little bit different than hiring a full-time team. On the flip side, I would say hire a full-time team if the knowledge that you're going to build in the course of what you're building together is going to be a proprietary source of advantage to you. And so are you going to then go and create something that, sure, that was a great team and a great set of folks, but now you've got a 2-month or 3-month head start because now those folks are going to do the exact same thing to folks that could be your competitors. And so I think it flips both ways. In terms of where it is, and I just want to make sure that whichever way they went, that they were thoughtful about it on the way in.
You bring up, see, this is why I love, because you hit by far what I would argue is one of the hooks is, hey, you can access cutting edge skills that is going to take you 6+ months and probably you can't find, right? And you also hit on the flexibility, which both sides, the talent and the employer, love the fact that if it doesn't work, no harm, no foul, right? And it's not a layoff. It's not doing bad to the freelancer if it's not working. It's actually doing a service to them by saying, hey, we tried this for a month. It didn't work. And to your original point, intentionality. So this is what we need. This is the outcome we're expecting. Did we hit it or did we not? So I love that you hit on that. Now you also hit on what we're starting to get into is the challenges, which next episode we'll hit on that, right? So you mentioned the IP aspect, which is, okay, we do this awesome work for 3 to 6 months, right? Maybe even up to a year. And then you nail it, Bryan. And then those individuals go to Google and do the exact same thing and outcompete us. And we can't sue them because there's not a non-compete, right? Or there's not a contractual terms for that. So last question for you, Bryan. And this is going to be open-ended very intentionally for you. And that is literally, what is the piece of advice that you want every single middle manager and also executive to know so that you are setting up your 10Xers, your best talent, so that you are setting them up for success? And very selfishly, what can the leaders listening to this, what can they do right away besides going and buying power to the middle?
I think the core of what they can do for success is combine a clear view of how the folks on their team are going to deliver value. It goes back to that role clarity, understanding the jobs to be done. Hey, what is it that we actually need to do? And what skills do we need for it so that I'm assembling the right team as we go? And then once I have the right team on the floor, if you will, how do I coach the most out of that team? How am I providing the right feedback? How am I a present and empathetic leader? I mean, the power of empathy is real. I mean, we had on the McKinsey Talks Talent podcast, Jamil Zaki, who's a professor at Stanford, who researches empathy. And as it turns out, empathy exists on a spectrum, and you can actually learn to be more empathetic. You can be trained to be more empathetic over time. But to be truly empathetic, you also, or to maximize your empathy in a given moment, it's also harder to do that if you're under a lot of time pressure, if you're under a lot of stress. And so think about your own environment of what you need to create for you as a leader, the right time, the right space, the right thoughtfulness, so that you have the time to coach the team on the field. And so I think it comes down to that. How do I really define who I'm looking for and what they're trying to do? And then how do I coach in the best possible way? Hold them accountable, make the right connections, coach the whole person. And if you're thinking about those two tracks together, it's a pretty good shot that you are doing the right things as a manager.
I love it. Okay, most important question. Where can our listeners find you and the great work you're working on, Bryan?
Great. So you can find me. It's Bryan_Hancock at McKinsey.com is my email. Feel free to reach out there or over LinkedIn. And I'd love to engage with you on these topics. We also have our own podcast, McKinsey Talks Talent. So feel free to check us out there as well.
You gave an email, Bryan. That is risky, my friend. That is kudos to that. Listen, Bryan, this was an absolute blast. Everyone, go pick up Power to the Middle. Go check out the podcast, and I'm sure, Bryan, people are going to be screaming to have you on soon. So I can't wait to have you on next.
It's great. Well, thanks so much for having me. Enjoyed the conversation, and hope you enjoy Atlanta.